A fall crop of cold crops such as broccoli, Brussels sprouts, or cabbage or cauliflower can't be beat in Oklahoma because we have excellent weather for growing them. The timing of planting them, though, is a little bit tricky. You've got to gear yourself up for it in the heat of August. Fortunately, the weather's been a little bit cool lately, and it's put us a little more in the mood for a fall crop. Now, you may have to call around various places around your town to find seed or to find transplants of these crops, because many people have already pulled their seed racks out for the season. I'm direct seeding some cabbage. I'll also be doing some Brussels sprouts and some broccoli. And you can do that too. The only thing is it sets the plants back about 3 weeks versus using transplants. If you're in northwestern Oklahoma, it may make a difference of up to 4 to 5 weeks, depending on how your fall weather goes. Now, if you are going to direct seed some of these plants, you need to keep in mind that you don't want to bury the seed too deeply. It's good to have a good moist seed bed for putting them in the ground, and you want to keep it moist, but make sure that you just cover them with maybe about 1/4 inch of soil at the most. If the seed's planted too deeply, it won't sprout properly. If you're raising transplants indoors, don't let them get too hot, and don't let the transplants get too large, because if they get too large and get a little bit stressed, they'll head out prematurely and you won't get a good crop of them. Now, these seeds of Brussels sprouts that I'm planting, I can count on getting a good stand of plants on into fall, and they're so winter hardy that if we don't have too severe a winter, I can harvest the little heads all through the winter season. The last one I'm planting is broccoli. And broccoli, Brussels sprouts, and some of the smaller heads of cabbage can be planted in alternating spaced double rows such as these, and they'll be just fine. You need to space them about 14 inches apart. And in about 10 days to 2 weeks, I'll come back and thin these from each little group and make sure that I have one plant spaced 14 inches apart. One other thing you need to keep in mind with the broccoli, Brussels sprouts, and cabbage is that right now the insect pests that affect them are out in force. And so you can count on having problems with cutworms possibly when the seedlings are first coming up. You'll need to inspect them about every other day for diamondback moth and cabbage loopers, because they'll be out hungry and ready to feed on the foliage. And also, you need to pay attention to feeding. And I think this is one area where people slip up when they're trying to grow cold crops. They forget that the plant needs to grow large and grow healthy in order to produce a large head. That means about 5 weeks from now, I'm going to come in and side dress these with a little bit of nitrogen. If you're putting transplants out, you can go in about 3 weeks and side dress them and keep them growing vigorously on into fall. Well, Ray has some butter beans to plant, so he'll have something to grace his plate later this fall.
One of the crops that may not be as popular as some others in the fall garden, but yet makes a really nice addition, is lima beans. Now, lima beans in the South are known as butter bean. The lima bean really is a native of Central America. Actually, it was developed in Peru, hence the name Lima, because Lima, of course, is the capital of Peru. Now, many of you may grow lima beans or butter beans in the spring garden, but we need to keep in mind that they're very temperature sensitive. And although they require warm days and mild nights, they like cool temperatures and high humidity at flowering time. So oftentimes in the spring when we plant them, by the time they get large enough and they start flowering and have some pod set in the early summer, we have some hot days and some low humidities, and so we don't have as good a fruit set as we may in the fall. So in the fall, it's a good time to plant them if we can get them in right away, really before about August the 10th or 15th, because they will go ahead and grow, and then as they begin to mature later in the fall, we should be getting some mild days and high humidities at night, and they will really make us a nice fall crop. Now, there are basically two types of butter beans. The large seeded one that I've just finished planting is the Ford Hook, is a Ford Hook type. In fact, this variety is Ford Hook, and you can see that the seed on it is quite larger than the other smaller seeded lima bean. The one that I'm planting that's the smaller seeded is the Henderson often referred to as the butter bush because it is a bush lima or butter bean. Now, lima beans are very high in nutrients. They're particularly high in vitamins and minerals. They're high in niacin and riboflavin. They're high in iron and phosphorus. They're a good source of fiber in the diet. They make an excellent crop when picked in the immature green stage and shell. That means before they begin to dry. Of course, we don't eat the pod on the butter bean, but as a shelled bean, they're an excellent fresh bean as well as freeze well and can well. I'm planting these today and taking advantage of some really nice weather we've had here in Oklahoma recently, here just at planting time, because we've had a good rain out here in the garden. It's kind of cloudy today, just an ideal day for planting. So I've got good moisture in the soil. But as far as soil preparation go, we do want to prepare our soil much like we would our regular bush beans. And of course, we planted bush beans just last week on the show. And we prepared this soil much in the same way as far as soil preparation and fertilizer goes, because they do require much of the same type of conditions. But after I've covered them, I'm still going ahead and put my thin layer of mulch on like I did my regular bush beans last week, because I do know that probably within 2 or 3 days we're going to have hot weather again, and certainly some clearing and some really bright sun. So I'm going to put this in here to help keep this soil cool and moist, so that perhaps it won't dry out quite as well, and I would probably get a pretty good stand then of beans coming up. If you've not tried butter beans in your garden, I would sure encourage you to do so, because they do make an excellent plant for the fall garden.
We still have several weeks of hot weather left, but with some planting ahead, here's another cool season crop that you can plant now, and that's carrots. Now, carrot seed, you might think of planting only in the springtime when the weather's very cool. What a lot of people don't realize, though, is that the ideal soil temperature for carrot seed to germinate is 80 degrees. And so our soil temperature is easily at that temperature now. It's probably not much over that because we've had a little cool spell these past few days. But it's ideal for sowing carrots for a fall crop. Now, the variety that I'm sowing is Danvers Half Long, and that's one that's readily available. You should be able to get it at most of your garden centers or co-ops. There are many, many other varieties of carrots available that we've planted now and again on Oklahoma Gardening, but this is one that we can quickly get to show you here on our program. I'm going to insulate the seed a little bit with some composted sawdust, similar to the way Ray did with the butter beans, because the carrot seed need good, constant moisture for good germination. In fact, you'd do well if you take a watering can with a very fine sprinkler head and lightly water them once a day so that they don't dry out. Once the carrots germinate, that taproot starts growing, and that's your carrot that you're going to harvest. And so you don't want the growth of it to be interrupted. Otherwise, you'll have misshapen carrots come harvest time, and you won't get as good a stand or as good a germination rate. I'm just going to pat that sawdust down to give the seed good, firm contact with the soil. It's nice and moist today, but we'll come back and gently water it tomorrow morning and every day until they germinate. And as warm as it is, they'll probably be up in about 10 days, and then we'll thin them. And that's the next step you must remember with carrots, is that they need to be thinned about 1 inch apart and then maybe 2 inches apart as they grow larger. But this will give us a nice crop for fall, and with carrots, you don't have to harvest them all at once. You can keep them on into winter, right in the soil, put a little mulch over them if you like, but just store them right there in the garden.
We hope you've enjoyed this classic from the Oklahoma Gardening Vault. Remember, even though these tips and techniques are timeless, there's always something new to learn in the world of gardening. By subscribing to both Oklahoma Gardening and OK Gardening Classics, you'll have access to a wealth of gardening knowledge, both classic and contemporary.